on behalf of Campbell & Company, I'd like to welcome you to Your Name Here, the complex practice of naming within the arts and culture sector. Today we are live from our Chicago and Seattle offices, and we're really excited to have two special guests with us today, Greg Walters from Rubinius Festival and Allison Rabbit from Seattle Opera. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to just quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. I promise this will be quick. So first, just close any programs that are running on your computer, other than GoToWebinar, of course. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move your cell phone away from your computer, and if you experience any visual issues, you can send a chat to Campbell & Company, or you can contact GoTo at 1-800-263-6317. Finally, today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you will earn 1 continuing education credit, and that is good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you'll receive an email from GoToWebinars that includes a web address to download your certificate, the PDF of the presentation, as well as information on how to register for our next webinar. We do welcome questions, so if you do have any, please send a chat to Campbell & Company, and I will make sure to ask them throughout or at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Aggie Sweeney and Melissa Berliner. Aggie Sweeney is President and CEO of Collins Group, a division of Campbell & Company. Since joining the firm over 15 years ago, Aggie's expert leadership has enhanced our position as the Northwest fundraising consulting firm of choice. She is recognized as one of the top fundraisers in the region and has provided counsel to more than 100 organizations and 35 campaigns, including the Museum of Flight, ACT Theater, Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, Honor Point Museum, and the Lord Liebrick Theater. Many of the campaigns for which she provided counsel for have been record-breaking, both the organization and a specific sector the organization serves. As an insightful listener, she is passionate about guiding organizations to use philanthropy to power growth, and she is a sought-after speaker and a trusted coach for executives. She is also, in her spare time, she is the vice chair, actually, of the Giving USA Foundation, and holds an MPA from the University of Colorado. Melissa Berliner is Vice President at Campbell & Company. As an arts and culture practice leader, Melissa has successfully directed a number of high-profile engagements with notable arts and cultural institutions like Chicago Shakespeare Theater, the Smithsonian Auditorium Theater, and the Cleveland Institute of Music, among many others. Prior to joining Campbell & Company, Melissa helped support multi-million-dollar fundraising programs at Victory Gardens Theater and Steppenwolf Theater Company in Chicago. So I'd like to turn over to Aggie and Melissa.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here. I want to take a quick minute to introduce our panelists. As Sarah mentioned, we have Greg Walters, Director of Development at Rubinius Festival, and Allison Rabbit, Associate Director of Development of Individual Giving at Seattle Opera. And we have a coast-to-coast panel here of arts and culture fundraising experts. No pressure, but these are practitioners in the trenches dealing with all sorts of nuances related to the topic we are discussing today. So I'm going to actually invite Greg and Allison to give a quick intro, tell us a little bit about your organizations, and maybe a sentence or two about your experience in this particular complex landscape. I'll turn it to you, Allison, to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. And so I work for Seattle Opera. We're in the business of opera. So, storytelling through music and theater and drama. So this topic is perfect for our company. Seattle Opera presents 5 productions annually, and we actually have a world premiere coming up in August, which we're really excited about. But in addition to our operas that we produce at McCall Hall at Seattle Center, we also have many community programs and also thousands of students that we reach through our in-school programs. So it's great to have a real big impact in the Seattle area. And so my experience with this topic is varied. Right now, we're in the process of a second phase of a capital campaign, and we're creating policies. So we're in the trenches and creating this as we speak. But in the past, in my career, I've worked with naming opportunities that involve naming a golf cart that I used to tour Seattle Center's campus, and then also things like named endowed funds and managing the back end of the capital campaign, so pledge fulfillment and making sure that we're stewarding donors. So I have a varied background of this, so I'm excited to be part of this conversation, and I will learn a lot. And I know my colleagues at Seattle Opera are also listening in, anxious to hear what everyone has to say. So.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you. So you're certainly building the bike while you're riding it, which is familiar space for many of us. So thank you for being here today. Greg, let me turn it over to you.
Sure. I'm also very excited to be here today and look forward to this coming hour. Rubinia Festival is North America's largest and, oldest and most programmatically diverse performing arts summer festival. We do about 140 performances each summer, ranging everything this summer from Lady Gaga to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. We do have a focus in classical music, but we do present a very wide array of genres. I've been heading Rubinia's fundraising efforts for the past 10 years, and the 5 years prior to that, I headed our major gifts area. So I've had a chance to work on several naming projects, everything from buildings to dining rooms within buildings, fellowships and programs, down to bricks, trees, benches, you name it. We've had a shot at it. And interestingly, having been in business for over a century as we have a lot of items that have been granted naming opportunity, naming rights in perpetuity. And that was natural to have occurred, and particularly I think around brick and mortar campaigns, that is something very natural to have happened. But what I always come back to is that even though we have 36 acres of parkland and 3 theaters to work with and a number of concerts every summer as well, you still have a finite number of items to name. So we've been working very hard in recent years to sort of put boundaries around the timing of our time frames of our new naming opportunities. And sometimes with that, we need to get creative.
So Greg, you've done the seemingly impossible. You've closed several gifts with time-limited naming opportunities. So we're going to turn to you to learn from your experience in a little bit. Thank you.
Great.
Before we go there, Aggie, Greg, Allison, and I want to just give a little context for our discussion today. And one piece here is that these issues seem to be making the headlines right now. Many of us are familiar with the Avery Fisher Hall renaming story, but for those of us who are not, I'll do a quick recap. So in March of this year, entertainment magnate David Geffen donated $100 million to rename Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center. And this opportunity was made possible by a payment of $15 million by Lincoln Center to the 3 children of Avery Fisher. And Mr. Fisher, you may know, gave $10 million to name the building in 1973. So that was 42 years ago, and in today's dollars, that would be $56 million. So notably, Geffen's naming opportunity has also been offered in, you guessed it, perpetuity, which begs the question, where will we be 42 years from now? And then another fun fact here is that David Koch has a lucrative naming opportunity within Lincoln Center. He also gave a $100 million gift, and his naming opportunity has a 50-year sunset. So headline number 2 here comes to the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada. This is Canada's largest museum collection, and they took on a campaign for the Crystal, which is a new wing that had a price tag of around $300 million. And there are at least 3 major pledges here that are still outstanding, and they each have significant recognition benefits associated. So the first is a donor who owes $10 million on a $30 million pledge made in 2003, and the new wing in the museum is named after him. Another donor pledged $5 million in 2006, and according to the most recent article we could find, he's paid less than 25% of the gift. He has a large photo display near the entrance, as well as a gallery space named after him. Another donor pledged somewhere between $5 to $10 million contingent on the success of a real estate transaction, and the museum has not received a gift to date. He was recognized on that same large photo display and has also been named in donor listings and recognized at galas and such. So in sum here, we have 3 different donors who've received significant recognition for their gifts, and yet according to the news, which of course we can all take with a little grain of salt, there is question as to whether or not these gifts will be paid. So both of these examples are certainly extreme in nature, but for us, they raise important questions that we hope to unpack today, and they reflect themes that we are seeing across the country with our arts and culture clients. So Aggie, I'm going to turn it to you for a minute to tell us a little bit about our work with clients and what we're seeing and hearing.
Great. Yeah, we're going to be real brief here. I just want to highlight that our firm is very committed to working with arts and culture organizations, and of course, the theme for this afternoon's webinar is focused that way. But I also want to point out that we work with other sectors too. And as I looked at the registration list, for those of you that are participating, many of you represent other sectors. And while much of our focus today is on arts and culture, we recognize that time-limited naming opportunities and other thoughts on recognition really do cover all of the sectors. Our firm has experience working with over 200 nonprofits in this particular sector. We're very proud of our work, and it spans the full 4 decades of our company. Melissa?
Thank you. And so some of our clients, as of late, have been asking us, so what are you seeing, and what are other people doing, and are people sunsetting, and how do I do this, and where do I start? And so we decided to do an informal survey last summer. We talked with 10 renowned arts and culture organizations. They each reflect sort of the best in class in their respective sectors, but they do have a range of budgets, as you see here reflected on this slide. But we had a deep conversation with each of them, and here's what we learned, that there is a growing interest or desire in implementing time-limited naming opportunities. And just to take it back a step, when we say time-limited, we mean that after an agreed-upon period of time, a previously named space, program, or even chair would be available potentially for renaming. So this interest in moving in this direction is being thought of as applied to individual donors in addition to corporate and foundation donors. I think a lot of us are familiar with time limiting in the corporate space in particular, but we were interested to hear that practitioners in the field want to apply this practice to individual donors as well. We also heard that practitioners want stronger policies and tools to support this kind of transition, but there are relatively few examples in place to draw from. So this leads us to why we're here today. So oftentimes consultants do webinars like this because we're sharing a best practice. Today is a little bit different. When it comes to donor recognition and specifically naming opportunities, it seems like the best practice is shifting a bit. And in the arts and culture sector, this practice is particularly complex because, as Greg pointed out so well, we have very few lucrative naming opportunities to offer our donors. So we're not in building mode on a regular basis. We don't have a refreshed list of classrooms or wings or facilities to name. Our nameable programs are finite and really often used to leverage annual support. So we have an opportunity here to create the best practice for our sector. And we think we can do it together, and that's where we want to start. So Aggie, Allison, Greg, and I will share some best practice-like tips and thoughts, but we really hope to hear from you and begin what we think of as a national dialogue about where we take this work. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Great.
So in the spirit of context building further, let's take a quick poll to understand your experience in the virtual room.
It's up.
It's up?
Yep. So the first question is, do you have experience time limiting a name opportunity outside of sponsorship, i.e. an endowed position or physical space? So you can select one, or select yes or no. So they are coming in. We have about 70%. Wow, you guys are good. They're good. They are engaged. It's still going up, so I'm going to leave it open, guys. This is really fun, this polling thing.
Sarah, do you want to keep the polls coming, or should we keep going?
Hang on one second, because we have to do each one separately. So
okay.
let me just close here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one, and we will share the results here in a second. So the next question is, do you have recognition policies? You can select yes or no. And again, we'll share the results here in a bit. Give you all a few seconds. We have a very active audience today.
Good for you guys.
Great.
You know, as we're waiting for these to come in, do we know how many participants are on the webinar today?
We have 105 right now from across the United States and beyond, actually. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the final question, which is, are you exploring whether or not to update recognition policies to include time-limited recognition? That's a mouthful.
So the question is, do you want to go there?
Exactly. Okay, we're almost up to 70% have voted. We'll wait just a little bit further. And we'll close that.
Okay, so
let me know when you want me to share those.
yeah, while Sarah is tabulating by hand here in the Chicago office, we want to share a couple pros and cons when it comes to time limiting. So in our experience, there are many pros to this work. So first of all, it gives you an opportunity to leverage prominent naming opportunities in the future. Greg and I were just talking about this as we were preparing for today. And, you know, as we think about the people who will be sitting in our seats 20, 30, 40 years from now, and how much they would be thanking us as they're embarking upon their capital campaigns and finding that they have creative recognition opportunities that are not locked away in perpetuity by donors they've never heard of. And then also imagine the long-term health of the organization generated by that kind of fundraising. So second, you get an opt-out clause in the very unlikely event that an associated name becomes damaging in some way. So, you know, we don't see this very often, but certainly Enron comes to mind here. I think organizations would appreciate the flexibility to decouple their organization brand with potentially some less than desirable corporate names in particular, and potentially individual names. Finally, it forces an organization to take a closer look at record keeping and policy building. So we hear from countless clients that are surrounded by namespaces in their theaters, museums, performance centers, zoos, and yet no one seems to know how those names got there or the donors who established them. So I see Greg kind of smiling and nodding his head. I imagine some of you out there are as well. So Greg, let me turn it to you. Based on your experience closing gifts like this, do you have anything to add to our pro list?
Sure, I think all of those are really good, but the one that I think about the most is that having time limitations allows the organization to grow, to change their focus, and not be beholden to a program that maybe isn't as relevant as it used to be, or even if they just want to change their positioning a bit simply because it has a name attached to it in perpetuity. So in other words, once the agreed upon time period is completed, you have a chance to revisit the usefulness of the program without worrying about damaging a relationship with an important donor.
Such an excellent point, thank you. So let's flip the coin and talk about some cons. We note that there are some pitfalls or challenges here, starting with the fact that this is not the easiest conversation to have with a donor. So oftentimes when we're talking to donors about leadership or principal level gifts, we're talking about their legacy, and it's not exactly fluid to say something like, we want to recognize your legacy for a period of 20 years. Second, there are some gray areas associated with exceptions to the rules. So we as fundraisers live in this gray area zone quite a bit when dealing with our donors. And we do want to be able to make that exception for the longtime board member who's been with us forever and ever, who embodies our artistry and our mission and so gets it. You know, we want that flexibility to have an exception. And then lastly, without proper context, this practice can be perceived potentially by some as taking the institution's needs into consideration before you take the needs of your donors into consideration. And so, Allison, you're working through your own thinking and policy building, as you stated before. Do you have anything to add to this con list?
Well, I think also just being aware of the situation that you're operating in. In our case at Seattle Opera, we operate in a leased facility. Our administrative offices and rehearsal spaces are in a leased facility, and we perform at McCaw Hall, which is a shared facility. So we're a tenant in the building. So in terms of the naming there, that's the responsibility of Seattle Center. But we have the relationships with the donors, so we're constantly in communication about that. But as we work into our new facility that's going to unite all of our operations under one roof, it's as well leased. So our agreement is for 30 years with Seattle Center with an option to renew in another 30 years. So we don't necessarily want to tie the naming opportunities directly to the lease, but we have to talk to donors about that situation. And, you know, we are obligated to adhere to that and comply with what Seattle Center has told us, which is basically we can name spaces until our lease is expired.
So complicated layers here.
Yes. And we'll just communicating with donors and helping them understand the situation, because they may make a gift and think, I'm naming this room for the next 50 years of Seattle Opera's life. And, you know, that's something to think about when our lease doesn't extend that long.
Thank you. So let's take a look at our results. Sarah, I'll let you.
Yep, so we're sharing here, and it looks like we have 72% have answered no to having experienced time limiting a naming opportunity outside of sponsorship. So 72% no, 28% yes. And going on to the next question here, and sorry, one second. Okay, going on. Sorry, it's taking this a little bit of time. Do you have recognition policy? 59% said yes. So pretty close split, 60-40. And then the final one, are you exploring whether or not to update recognition policies to include time-limited recognition? So it's obvious that this webinar is very timely because 83% answered yes.
Wow.
So very high percentage. So go ahead and turn the slides back over to you guys.
Okay.
There you are.
Well, 83% of you. Let's do it together. How about it? So I'm going to turn it to you to dig a little deeper with our esteemed panel here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Melissa. So, Greg, you mentioned that you have successfully brokered gift agreements with time-limited naming opportunities. Can you tell us a little bit more about a recent example and reflect, kind of reflect how the dialogue went with the donor?
Absolutely. I'd start by reflecting on something that was touched on a moment ago, and that's that corporations and individuals are very different in this regard. Companies are going to be much more open to a defined term. It helps them in budgeting, so they don't have to take that hit all at one time. They can spread it over time, and I think individuals look at it differently. And in the example that I have in mind, it was a much tougher conversation. I went in with a defined time frame in mind, and I was robustly rejected. But what that really did, though, was it started a conversation about what the donor's motivations were for making the gift and what they were looking to get out of the naming experience. And I don't think that conversation really would have taken place if we had gone in simply turning over rights in perpetuity. I don't think it would have led to that depth of conversation. But what that wound up with him saying was that what was most important to him was to be able to know that his grandchildren, who were, I believe, about in their 20s at that time, would be able to come to the park and see this naming opportunity for the rest of their lives. So although that wound up being a much longer time frame than I was anticipating, that was how we framed the agreement. It was that the naming was going to be viable throughout the lives of his grandchildren.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. As you think about your donor constituency, what duration for naming feels right to you? You know, and of course, assuming that gift levels are maximized.
Sure. Well, I do think that that really does depend on what the item is that's being named. I would like, though, just broadly speaking, I would like to look at the 25 to 30-year range. And going back, you mentioned making sure that the giving levels were in the right place. I would say that simply adding time into the conversation, into the negotiation, for lack of a better word, adds an entirely different element, and that can lead to a larger gift, because that simply wasn't part of the conversation initially. So you were going in, the donor was going into it assuming that there was going to be one price and it was going to last in perpetuity. But if you're coming in and changing the equation entirely, you're showing that time has value, whereas that really hadn't been addressed when you're just going in automatically with perpetuity. So I think of it just as another tool, and well, not only another tool to get a gift that reflects the value of the space that you're parting with effectively for the life of the naming.
Great, thanks a lot. And Allison, Seattle Opera has had some success offering individual donors time-limited season sponsorships. How are donors reacting to this concept?
Well, it's been very positive. As Greg mentioned, corporate sponsorship is a different program, and we've had a healthy program there. But individuals, it helps us to be able to recognize the need, first the annual need for, we produce these operas and we bring amazing artists, and that requires continual investment. And so the opportunity to connect donors with that need is really great, because it's a great match for values and it helps them to get closer to our work. We combine the benefits to match the size of the gift. So if they're sponsoring an artist, they get to meet the artist and go backstage and kind of see more about the work that we do. And our donor family is 6,200 people large, and so it also helps people get a deeper personal experience that their gift makes an impact, and that it takes a village to put on this work. And how we started the conversation and went into the individual sponsorships was actually born out of the first part of our comprehensive campaign, which included a capital component. And this was launched in 2007. And we all know what happened in 2008 and 2009. So we had to put our capital plans on pause, and we had all these major donors who had made a significant investment, and we had conversations with them about converting their capital gift into an unrestricted or artistic gift. And many of them were receptive to that, and some were not, and have kept their gift designated to capital, and we work with them through this campaign. But for the people who were able to help Seattle Opera thrive through this difficult economic time, we use these sponsorships to recognize that investment in our work. And it's really taken off, because now we've completed recognizing all those gifts that were made in that first campaign, and we're growing the sponsorship program with people who just want to make an investment in our work now.
Great. Great, thanks. So as we know, most of the participants in the webinar today are looking at recognition policies. How will you apply this experience at Seattle Opera to your campaign recognition policies, or do you have any suggestions?
Well, just as we scale the benefits and recognition, as we do with annual gifts, we'll do the same for capital. So as we're in the middle of conversations with our campaign steering committee, which is comprised of board members, as well as we're working with, of course, the Collins Group is guiding us, and leadership staff to see how we can potentially tier some of the naming opportunities in the capital project. So the time frame, longer time frame, would be for a larger gift or a more significantly named space. So we're kind of matching the time frame with the gift chart, and we're gonna have that conversation with our donors and see what they think.
Yeah, and Greg definitely had some great experience that he shared with us. What are especially for capital, when it's more than just a season or a single production, do you have any thoughts on what feels like the right duration for naming?
Yeah, that was interesting. Well, as I said, we have this sort of lease that hangs there, so 30 years would probably be our top end. But, just in looking at the last 15 years at our company, there have been 3 major campaigns that have happened that we've been part of, either for our performance space or for our administrative offices, and now for our permanent home. And we can anticipate that that will be the same in 10 to 15 years, that we'll have another opportunity and we'll need to raise more funds and invest in our program and our spaces. So just thinking about historically, I would say that maybe 10 to 15 years would maybe be the baseline for a naming opportunity of a space.
Great. We have information from Seattle Opera. Did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, well, this is a page from our program from Ariadne Osnestos, which is on stage right now. And in each program, we list our donors who support either production or performance and artistic, so the artistic is cut off, but just maximizing all the opportunities that we have to communicate to our donors how we appreciate their gifts and recognize their gifts. So this is in our program, but we also use the reader board and banners, and all the organizations who are involved in this webinar today. You have your opportunities that you could name either for annual donors or you know, maybe multiple years, like with corporate sponsorships. So
Great.
Just good. Maximize.
Great. It's wonderful. I appreciate getting the experience from Seattle Opera. Greg, before we move on, I wanted to turn things back to you. As you think about the duration of named recognition, and I know you gave a great example of one family, but do you have any additional perspective you want to add?
Sure. And actually, Melissa and I were talking about this a little bit when it first came in today, and it brought to mind another example that was really tricky, and that was an agreement was put into place well before my time that read, and literally word for word, this will be in effect for 25 years or as long as the donor wants. Well, what do you think the answer to that's going to be? You know, so the 25 years hit, and we went to them to say, okay, we'd like to tie this up. The most important thing is that it tied directly to programming. It affected what we were doing on the stage and what we were required to put on the stage. And we wanted to go a different direction. But since it was there in writing, a signed contract that it would be for 25 years or as long as they wanted, they opted for the longer term there. But what we were able to do was go to them and really have a strong conversation, because we felt strongly enough that even though it was a very valuable gift, it was a good dollar amount, very few dollars can replace what opportunity you have to put something on the stage. So it was actually worth our while to, or might have been worth our while, to return the gift and have our freedom back in terms of what we can present. And we actually did take that posture at one point. And what that led to was they are still getting recognition, but the restrictions around what that presentation needs to be were loosened in a manner that was very helpful to us. So that was another negotiation there where maybe it wasn't the standard timeline that we had in mind, but you negotiate long enough and you come up with a situation that both parties can agree to. So that's another one we had there that was certainly out of the norm, but I think it was healthy for us to do, and we weren't necessarily hamstrung by this gift.
Great, thanks. Thanks. It's great to have experience from the field, so thank you both. Melissa, let me turn things back over to you, and let's talk about policies.
Great. Thank you, Aggie. So for those of you policy builders in the room, this section is dedicated to you. The first step when you're thinking about where to start is effective policy building. And the first place to start when it comes to policy building is to really understand past and current practices. So digging back through every file cabinet you can get your hands on, every computer file, institutional memory, whatever you have available, to really understand what's been done to date, who expects what, and why, to the extent you can, certainly. From there, convening what we would call an ad hoc gift stewardship task force to really help unpack this issue. Policies are certainly a piece of paper, but they reflect decisions and conversations and nuances that really require a deeper bench to land on. And so when you convene a gift stewardship task force, the sort of responsibility is brought into a wider net of stakeholders, and this should include a mix of staff and volunteers who would really come together and ask some critical questions. So first and foremost, why are we updating policies? What's the current institutional appetite for change? What do our donors expect from us? And this points to what Greg was talking about in terms of open and transparent communication. What are the needs of our donors? What are the needs of our organizations? How does that align or not align? And what time limits seem to satisfy all of the above? So if we're currently offering perpetuity as sort of the go-to place, can we possibly dip a toe in the water by amending this a little bit to useful life of the building or the program? So that would be sort of a baby step into this. And then can we go even further and suggest a finite period of time, 20 to 30 years? Allison, I like your thinking about 10 to 15 years. Can we go there, and would those time limits match the needs of our donors and the organizations we're represented? And then using this task force or this group of staff and volunteers to ask, how will those in our seats in the future be impacted? It's such an important question, and I think all of us here wish that our predecessors would have potentially asked that question as well. What are the exceptions to the rules? So the longtime board members who care so deeply about our missions, who are so invested in our art, could we make any exceptions to those rules? What would those scenarios look like? So Allison, when we were preparing for this call, you had suggested that these questions were really helping you think about some of your planning efforts, and I'd love it if you could just share how you've answered them, or how you are answering them in real time.
Well, we are answering them. So I think the first thing that you mentioned about updating the policies, that's where the conversation just grows, because if you have to write something down and you have to think about the future needs of the organization and the multiple needs that each constituent group has, the best way is to create the policy. So right now we have a recognition policy in place, but there is the piece that we're working through is this naming component and the conversation of incorporating a sunset clause. And you mentioned the useful life of the building. We will include that in our policy and have taken away any word permanent or anything like that. As I'm sure many of the people who have policies in place, you'll find permanent is everywhere or in perpetuity. Yeah, exactly. So that's where we are with our campaign steering committee. And in terms of the appetite for change, that is so interesting given the day and age that we're living in right now, where change is just the norm. So I think that the benefit of having this conversation and talking about a time frame in the naming policy is that there's a real appreciation for reality. The reality that this campaign that we're in right now and that your organization may be in right now is not the last campaign. There will be one right on the heels of it. And so sort of acknowledging that reality. So for us, our current donors, given that we're in this second phase of a capital campaign where we actually will realize the creation of this building, we have these donors who have given a gift and expect to be recognized for that gift that they gave, 7 or 10 years ago. So we're incorporating that into our policies. So their gift that they make to this campaign, they will be recognized at the level that's a combined, cumulative total of their gift from the last one and the gift to this one. But I think in terms of how we can serve ourselves in the future, I think documentation and keeping it simple is what we're keeping in mind, because I think each of us, as we've done that excavation and looking into what was done in the past and what people were promised, there's a lot of confusion, and when it gets too complicated, we're just not serving ourselves, our donors, or the organization. And in terms of exceptions to the rules, I think we're probably all operating right now in a place of as the situations come up. I mean, I can remember at another organization I worked with, there was a major donor who had named a lobby, and it was maybe 12 years ago, and he was still involved with the organization, and his family had changed, and he wanted his plaque updated as well. And, you know, it's like you just make a choice that this is a relationship that's valuable. There was no policy in place, but there's sort of an ethical commitment and an interest in the partnership, so you make a change. So we're all kind of operating that way. Let's just get it written down and help ourselves.
I've seen many policies that say the donor gets to pay for the update of that plaque.
Yes, yes, that's what we did. And they were happy to do it.
Thanks, Allison. So step 2 in this journey here, you've got your policies, you've used a task force to vet and create those policies. Step 2 then would be to engage your full board. And just like any other initiative, 100% board buy-in is key. Oftentimes we think about the board rubber stamping policies, but this is not one of those occasions here. So we want to really cultivate board buy-in. First, we need to determine the right committee to carry this forward. Does it live in the executive committee or the development committee? I think that's institution specific. But once you determine that, seek full board vote to adopt the policies. And again, it's not just about rubber stamping. Create an FAQ document for board members so they really understand why we're making these changes. They have an opportunity to be thoughtful about their decision making, and they're actively plugged in to the conversation. So Greg, I imagine you've leaned on board members to help you through some of these tricky conversations that you've had. I'd love to get your perspective on board buy-in.
Sure. Interestingly, in our case, although we've had many different campaigns in my time there, or well, we have had a lot of different campaigns, and at the same time, we haven't had a single campaign where we're going essentially to market with a whole bunch of naming opportunities that come out at one time. So there hasn't been a situation where we've had a sort of a committee that does nothing but work on the naming. But in terms of board buy-in, it has been expressed at board meetings by the board chair that this project is happening and we need everybody to do something. And then the chair would follow up in writing, and in that we could do a personalized amount, request there. But then it really did fall on development staff to go out and make those calls to bring those in. Now that does differ from actual naming opportunities. We have a very large board, about 80 members, and so we didn't necessarily expect to name 80 things, but we did expect everybody to do something to be able to reflect the commitment of the board. But one thing also that I think has been very important for us is that we require all new board members to serve on the development committee for their first 2 years on the board. And while that doesn't necessarily solve everything, it requires them to learn how fundraising works for us, its part with us, and our policies and what our priorities are and that sort of thing. So over time, all board members become informed as to what's going on out there and what we're looking to do in the bigger picture. And I think that alone has been very helpful.
Greg, I can't even tell you how much I love that strategy. So I just want to reiterate that we're inviting new board members to serve on the development committee. It's a must for their first 2 years of board service.
It's automatic, and it's part of what they agree to when coming onto the board.
Okay, love that. Okay, so step 3 here, communicate with stakeholders. So you have your policies, they've been approved by the board. Where do you go next? And that's communicate, communicate, communicate. So prepare talking points for solicitors. These are tricky conversations. Sometimes they're happening between staff members and donors. Sometimes a volunteer is present. Regardless, everyone needs to have the right talking points around why we are moving toward time limiting, why we are offering time limiting to donors. These are tough conversations, so to the extent that you can prepare solicitors, you should. Scheduling one-on-one conversations with donors. So this is an interesting one. You likely have donors who would be grandfathered in, presumably, because they have naming rights that have been offered in perpetuity in a previous setting, and we don't want to upset the apple cart too much, so we'll go ahead and grandfather them in. But we would recommend that you go ahead and sit down with them individually, if they're still around, and share that the institution is moving in this direction, and this is why. And the reason that this is a good idea is because we've heard successful stories from our clients about having those conversations with donors who were grandfathered in, who then had a turn of faith or opinion and thought, you know what, you can go ahead and rename my space and reuse my recognition because this seems like it's the right move for the organization and its long-term health. And at the end of the day, that's what our donors want to support. So never underestimate the power of communication. And then, of course, back to our paperwork here, creating clear and transparent pledge forms and gift agreements so that you have the right tools in your tool chest to really codify these gifts. And then lastly, keep the dialogue fresh. So oftentimes we think about updating policies once every 10 years, maybe 20 years, I'm not sure. You can take a look at your last policy update. We're suggesting that this is something you should talk about even annually. And one way to do that is to formalize a gift stewardship committee who could be on hand as needed to vet extraordinary circumstances. So those gray areas we talked about earlier, if you have a gift stewardship committee specifically called together to talk through those nuances, then you keep dialogue fresh within your organization and therefore keep your policies fresh. So with that, Aggie, I'd love to turn it to you to talk about valuation, as this came up quite a bit when we did our informal survey last summer.
Great. Thanks a lot, Melissa. And I'm going to go through these really quickly, and we do want to have a few minutes at the end for your questions. So if you have questions on valuation that we don't cover, just be in touch with us later. There's just a few rules that are helpful to consider when we help nonprofit organizations price their naming opportunities. One is, what is the actual cost of the facility, or if it's a program, of the program? What we find is a rule of thumb recommendation is to price the naming for a facility so that the gift is no less than 50% of the total building cost. Now, we know that there's all kinds of examples where that has not been the case. It's been much less than that. But what we see for many of the organizations that are raising the most money, and many that are older, that is what their policy is. So while there's always exceptions to the rule, that's one of our recommendations. Next, when you consider how to price internal spaces, it's important to think about the prominence and visibility of a particular space, and therefore what its perceived value is. Ideally, the sum of all of the internal spaces within a facility should exceed the total building cost. So if you just think about how much does it cost to build a space, it's not quite enough. It's important also to look at how that space is used. In managing to the fundraising plan and donor pool, it's helpful to consider what the needs are on your gift table and the capacity of your donor pipeline. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with some of the nonprofit institutions we're advising, and we have a list of space and program naming opportunities, and then we look at how many gifts do we need at different levels, and they aren't quite in an alignment. So of course it's important to consider that before you start committing specific named opportunities to some donors, and then realize that later in the campaign you may not be able to be consistent. Now, one thing about specific opportunities, I'd like to suggest that organizations maintain a level of flexibility with them. While the policies can be board adopted and pretty strict, the specific naming opportunities, it's important for the development professionals and executives and the trustees involved in some of the discussions with the donor to recognize that some flexibility may be helpful. So when we look at some of the variable price points, it's okay to offer pricing options that may correspond with a certain duration of recognition. And if there's a particular space that a donor is very interested in, and Greg alluded to this earlier, you may negotiate with them the length of the recognition based upon the size of gift they're prepared to make. I'm currently advising a museum client, and they're approaching 50 years. So they're still relatively young, but they're recognizing we got a lot of decades ahead of us. So it makes sense for them at this point in their history to really be considering limiting the duration of named spaces and named programs. Let me share just a few lessons that we've learned, and I'm not going to be able to
where we say, look, this is something we need to change, but we'll give you X amount of time to either come to a new gift agreement or understand that we need to move on. It is a tough conversation, and I'll admit we don't win 100% of them, but you need to look at what's best for the organization on the whole, and you don't want, especially if there isn't strong documentation on what a naming time frame is, then you're kind of caught behind, actually, and you kind of need to defer to their comfort level, I would say, from my perspective.
I'll just jump in here quickly. Of course, this is all very donor specific, but I happened to do a feasibility study interview recently with a donor who shared with me his frustration over the way his recognition had been treated by an organization. He has named some spaces. There was not solid paperwork in place because this naming was done years and years and years ago by a family member. And he felt that the organization had not come forward to talk with him in the way that he would have appreciated about the circumstance. And what he was looking for was just open, transparent communication.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the situation. We don't have the paperwork. I want to work with you to understand the history of the gift, the history of this recognition, and then together talk about where we go forward. And it was, for him, it was as simple as, just come talk to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stewardship is important always.
Okay, I love these questions, frankly, because it's like such a gray line with them. My organization is 14 months into the quiet phase of a capital campaign. We have raised 26% of our goal and sold a handful of naming opportunities. No formal naming agreements have been signed. How will we handle this conversation with donors who have already specified which naming opportunity they would like to have? And how would this affect setting a time frame on future naming gifts? A big one.
Aggie, you want to jump in there?
Sure, let me jump in. What we generally recommend is that naming opportunities be confirmed based on the order that gifts or written pledges are received. So if a donor is talking about making a gift, but they haven't actually confirmed it, it can be helpful to let them know that we can't actually reserve a named recognition opportunity for you until your gift or pledge is confirmed. But then to go back in that order. What so often happens early in a capital effort is the building plans are still being changed. You know, you can't lock into a naming opportunity, for instance, for, you know, a specific conference room because it might get cut out of the plan.
This is Alton. I just want to add, Aggie, because we are in that space.
Yeah.
So we have pledge agreements for gifts that include a line about how donors want to be recognized. But what we're going to do in the fall is go back with each individual donor and draft basically a naming agreement in a letter that states that they'll then return signed to us, so then we have a companion piece to the pledge agreement. So it sounds like what needs to happen is follow up with the donor and draft that other agreement, but we don't have our spaces. So we know that there will be a space for everyone who gives $100,000 and above, but we just don't know the details yet. So you can't, how can you draft something if you don't have it?
Yeah, so. Yeah. But you can definitely put something in writing.
Right.
And we'd be happy to share some examples of gift agreements that confirm named recognition, you know, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, Aggie, that would be great. We actually have a lot of questions from our listeners about resources, either examples or samples that we can put up on our website, so we can go ahead and do that. Okay, next question. And then, Allison, I didn't know if you were able to stay on just a little bit longer, because we certainly have some really good ones, and we have a lot of people still on the call. So let's just go just a few more minutes. Aggie, when you mentioned that when, quote unquote, moving from the outside in, did you say the sum of the internal naming ops should exceed the total cost? Would it be possible for you to elaborate?
Yeah, it's just recognizing that what it costs to build out a building, like, may actually be less expensive than if you summed up all of the naming opportunities. It may not be, but just to recognize that that may be the case. And it's especially true for something like a lobby or other super prominent area, because the cost to build it may be less than what the price of the naming opportunity is. But I think it's just helpful when, and again, we're talking capital, when the building plans are pretty final, to take a look at all of the named opportunities and the gift chart and just see how it all sorts out, and to make decisions that seem reasonable, but to still maintain a level of flexibility to accommodate what's really important to donors.
And just to piggyback on Aggie's comments, this is Melissa. When we're working with our clients to value naming opportunities, we think about actual cost to the extent there is one. We also consider visibility. So how much will this space or program be seen or used? And then we think about mission relevance. So how important is this space or program or initiative to our core mission, who we are, what we do, and why we exist? And we kind of rank and rate each space or naming opportunity from each vantage point and arrive at pricing that way. Sarah?
Okay. Next question. So this is a twofold one. For orchestras, the chair-sponsor associations between donors and musicians can be great. We have a few musicians whose positions have been endowed. I would like to start an annual giving plan to supplement our individual donor giving. Questions. 1, should this program be a gift above and beyond regular annual giving? And 2, how best to distinguish endowment gifts versus annual gifts?
Well, I can speak with...
Go ahead, Allison.
I can speak with the just to the annual piece and differentiating between the endowed fund and the maybe sponsorship of a chair. I think if it's an annual, I mean, it's built into your season. It has the beginning of the season and the end of the season when the sponsorship will be recognized. And in terms of the question also said, is it an increased gift over an annual amount or just that's the annual amount? We've done both, honestly. Some people are ready to make that jump and need a bit of an incentive, you know, to kind of take that first leap. And so if they're usually giving $10,000, then we ask them to increase to 25. They're not making an additional 25,000 gift on top of their 10. It's just an increase. But yeah, I think you can really work with the donor and see what your needs are as an organization and where the comfort zone is and do what works for you.
I would say we do things a little bit differently in that the orchestra that we present the most is not our own. We're a presenting organization rather than an orchestra itself. However, we do have a separate program that is a training institute for high-level, just postgraduate students. So we do have scholarship, fellowships, and contributions that go directly towards that program. We've done that either way over time, where it is either a separate gift or you can designate your annual fund gift directly towards that. So we've gone either way there over time. Right now, we have it that they're one and the same. As far as endowment, we simply list those differently. Of course, the levels in mind and the levels required are significantly different. But we just list them in different places, but as they're attached to the artists themselves, that is consistent with what an annual gift, what the draw of the endowment would be consistent with what the annual gift is. So we would recognize those in a similar manner. And then in different places elsewhere in the program book when you're just talking about annual gifts and when you're just talking about endowment.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to be set for today. I know there were just a few more questions, but I'll make sure that Melissa and Aggie have them so that they can respond. But I do want to thank, I definitely, on behalf of Campbell & Company, thank you to Greg and Allison for sharing your insights with us. It sounds like this is a hot topic and one that could still be explored further. And thank you to everyone out there who are listening in. And if you have some time and you haven't checked out the survey or the findings from the survey that we did this last summer, you can go onto our website, and in the search bar you can just search naming opportunities, and the study will pull up. But from all of us at Campbell & Company, thank you so much. Our next webinar is actually next week, May 13th, where we'll be talking about communicating your campaign case, if that's relevant to any of you listening on the phone. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful spring. Thank you.